Today, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at all of the new features coming to the procedural generation of Rust's maps. Earlier this month, the Ox 2 staging branch went public, and we're getting a taste of the October 3rd update, which is going to completely revamp everything about the map. And we're going to be running around looking at all of the small features of the new cliffs, and taking a look at some of the new environmental monuments, as well as some very cool new base building locations. Keep in mind this is on the Ox 2 staging branch, which is a testing server, and there's still a lot of small details that need to be adjusted. First, let's start off with where a lot of you spend most of your time in Rust, the beach. You'll notice a bunch of new things, the cliffs, the new rock formations in the water, and there's also connections between the islands that are separate from the mainland via these nice little island things here. And there's a tasteful amount of variation between the sand and moving up in towards the mainland. Once you start moving inland, you'll notice different types of cliffs from the beach side, and these also vary across the entire map. And some of them, like this one here, are large enough that you could build a 2x1 on it, put a legacy shelter down, and it's also great for PvP. You're getting all these new peaks and different angles and things that you wouldn't normally see on the traditional Rust cliff sides. My favorite thing about the new cliffs is the way they look in the snow biome, where you're also going to find these dark rock formations in the water, as well as these land versions of icebergs which connect to the cliffs in a way that make it easy to get from the bottom to the top and serve as an interesting build location. There's also a different version of this, which is like two mini islands, and one of them is connected to the cliff side, and they always spawn with the same cliff formation, and it's kind of like a smooth slope up to the top. These are scattered across the entire map across all biomes, including these small islands on the outside of the mainland. A lot of the shots in this video, I'm very far away, zoomed in, and it makes the object that I'm capturing look very small. But once you get in first person and come look at it, you'll see how large everything really is, and it doesn't feel like it's too hard to climb. It doesn't feel like you're trapped in a location. Like when you used to spawn on the beach, sometimes you would get in an area where you'd have to run for 4 or 5 grids just to get up to the top of it, and that is no longer the case anymore. And you'll notice that I'm able to completely walk through this water without swimming, which between the mainland and these smaller islands used to be an issue, and it appears like everything between them has been flattened out and connected with these new rock and island formations. And even these outer islands that surround the mainland have variations between the higher elevation and the lower beach side so that you can get up and down easily. And even though this island that we're looking at is pretty small, you'll still find these unique cliff formations that flow with the hills. Also, you might be wondering what's going on with these darker new rock formations that are scattering around the water. Well, it looks like you will not be able to build inside of them, which should be obvious. You'll see these things scattered around the edge of the map everywhere, and this is going to limit the size of bases that clans are going to be able to build out in these areas, but not by much, because you can still build on top of them like you see here. You're just not able to build that far inside of them. You can still squeeze the foundation in a little bit like you see here, and then build on top of it if you would like. It also kind of allows you to build higher than you would normally be able to if there's enough space on the rock for all 4 corners of the foundation to fit. The very small versions of these rock formations aren't going to have much of an effect on building, but you see these larger ones behind me will. And then there's also these new miniature islands that are scattered around the map. Before, we only had icebergs that were like this, and now we're going to have a bunch of these everywhere. From what I've seen, there's supposed to be a couple different versions of them, but this one right here is a little broken at the moment. And I'm pretty sure these mini islands also spawn with their own specific cliff formations, because if we take a look at this glitch right here, we can see how they're separated into chunks. And you can also see that when you zoom out far enough away from them that they despawn. And if we take a look at another one of these mini islands, you can see it looks pretty similar to the one from the snow, which means you're always going to have a very nice path to get up to the top of the cliffside. I could be wrong though, because on this one here, there's a very steep hill, which is not a nice little pathway like we saw on the other two. But even with this steep of a cliff, you could still climb all the way up to the top. It just takes a little bit of skill and is definitely a lot easier than it would have been on the old cliff formations. And once you get up to these little ridges like this, you really get a whole lot of options as to where you can move through, and it feels like you're surfing across the side of the cliff. Instead of having to only go up or down, you have the option to go left and right as well. And once you get up to the top, there's these ridges that you can hide behind before you decide to go into the mainland, and if anybody's up here countering you, you can hide behind them and make an escape downwards. In combination, this is going to make the beachside much more interesting, with more possibilities for build locations and ease of access to the top, as well as resources that spawn down here like the new wood log piles. And all the medium-sized islands around the mainland come with the same features that you'll find over there, meaning it's going to be much more interesting and viable to build over here, making it a hotter build location. Players will be able to travel from the island to the mainland much more easily. The new cliff and rock formations make it interesting to explore, and once players get their base set up on these outer islands, they'll be able to travel from the ocean deep into the mainland via the new long rivers. Previously, rivers used to be extremely short and they looked out of place in the world of Rust. Now they span grids very deep into the mainland, and there's usually 3 rivers. I'm not sure if that's how it's going to be all of the time, depending on the size of the map. And I am pretty positive we're going to be seeing bridges soon, because how else are you going to account for when a road crosses these extremely long rivers? I would say leaving it like this looks a little bit weird, but it does get the job done, so it might be a few more months until we see bridges, unless they've got it prepared already and just haven't showed us. These new rivers are also going to carve out their own pathway through the terrain, and it's going to impact the rest of the things around them. As you can see here, there was a giant hill that would have been here otherwise, and it's been carved out for the river to pass through and smoothed out for players to easily traverse it. And these things are long. They go so far inland and they shrink as they get closer to the center of the island. Before this update, everybody would fight over rivers because it was one of the only places of fresh water for your farm base, but now dozens of opportunities are opening up across all of these rivers, which is going to make it easier for T-Guy Tom's army to rise from the shadows. And these are not void from PvP opportunities. The new cliffs are scattered all around the river throughout the whole length of it, giving you endless possibilities for sneaking around, head glitching, placing barricades down. Although I will admit it is a little bit difficult to get these barricades down on the new cliffs, but they do offer you a very new and unique feel for when you're PvPing. When you're running around the map now, it feels like you've got places to go and things that you can hide behind and terrain that you can memorize and path your way out through it, instead of just being out in an open barren landscape. And with the new design of these cliffs allowing you to be able to maneuver left and right instead of just up and down, you have so much opportunity to flank and ways to confuse anybody that's chasing you by taking a different route other than straight down. And these cliffs that are inland also have the same features at the top of the beachside cliffs, where there's like little enclosures that you can hide yourself in and barricade yourself in. Everything about these new cliffs were designed in a way that makes PvP more exciting and adventure more worth it. And for a lot of the older players out there, you're going to feel like you're rediscovering the map for the first time when you're exploring it. And it still feels and looks like Rust used to, but it feels better and it's enhanced compared to how it used to be. Not to mention that you can pretty much walk up a majority of these new cliffs, but there are certain circumstances where you have to jump, obviously. Also, there's a bunch of stuff like this floating grass everywhere. I'm pretty positive that's going to get fixed, but it does look weird. There's also floating rocks in like the canyon. And another thing like that I'm unsure of is these new rivers are a lot less deep than they used to be, and when you're running across it, you're still running, but when you're in third person, you're swimming. I've seen a lot of people suggesting that these be deeper, but I kind of like it the way it is right here, because in the past, running across the rivers was always a little bit of a headache. You're like, oh, I'm running away from somebody, now I gotta swim across here and I'm super slow. And there's a few things like that that feel a little weird unless you're an experienced Rust player, and you can tell as an experienced Rust player that it's developed specifically because of just the way the game is. Speaking of which, let's bring it back to the beach, which is where a majority of large clans like to build at. And like we went over earlier, there's a bunch of these new rock formations that spawn seemingly randomly around these areas. You'll see in places like this where the water comes in a little bit, there's not that many rock formations here, but it's enough that it could mess up your base build. And you'll see here where it happens again, where the water comes in, and this time there's a mini island at the end of it. So we're still going to see those giant clan bases, especially on larger size maps like the 6,000 size here. But you can tell that these new beachside rock formations were more than just an aesthetic decision. And you can see here around the abandoned cabins how the terrain is a lot more bumpy than it used to be, and there's less flat space because the old cliffs were pretty big and had flat tops, and now they curve upwards and are very bumpy. You'll still be able to build on top of them, but it'll get to a point where it becomes difficult to continue expanding. This becomes especially apparent when you zoom out even further. And right here is a great example where you would have seen a mega 9x9 grid giant lag factory built, but now with all of these rock formations around here, it's going to be a lot more difficult for these oversized clans to build these oversized bases that ruin the experience for all of the other players on a server by making them lag, by having 50 people living in one base and roaming in gigantic groups on something that's not meant to be a clan server of that size. And don't get me wrong, I've played in dozens of clans, and I've even ran a clan of 300 people that crashed a server a few years ago. It's very fun. A lot of people do it. But what this is going to allow server owners to do is create spaces on the beach side to block these large clan bases from being built with these new rock formations, as well as clan servers being able to remove them, which is going to allow for a better customizable experience and separation between a clan server and something where clans are not meant to be. There is, however, the new environmental monuments, is what I'm calling them. I don't know what to call it. The lake, which seems like it's unfinished at the moment because there's supposed to be swamp trees around here. It feels like it could use some more cliffs, but we'll just have to see what direction it goes in the future. As for now, this is probably going to be a new hotspot for giant clan bases, but it's still going to be a little difficult because it gets deeper as it gets towards the center of the water. I do see this as becoming a great place for a village to form though. You've got fresh water here for farms, you can fish in here, but it does divot down into the land a little bit, so any enemies coming up on you from the top will have the high ground on you. But since boats spawn around here, you'll be able to build multiple bases around the lakeside and traverse between them with a boat, which is useful because these lakes are quite big. About the same size as the canyons, which are also very large. And I see these as becoming hotspots for smaller groups and solo players because of how hard it would be to build larger bases here. And once you get down deeper into the canyons, the sides of them get pretty close together, enough so to where you can make a pretty ridiculous bunker base down in the crack. And at a higher elevation would be a dream location for every roof camper. Also, something I discovered while exploring the canyons is that once the terrain starts to stretch a certain amount, there's a different splatter that appears. And you'll no longer be able to walk directly up the hill any longer, you'll have to jump, but if you're on the grass, you can just walk up it without having to jump a single time. I'm not sure if this is intended to be this way and if this is just some sort of random occurrence, but if this does happen to be the case, it's something to keep in mind, especially when you're trying to get away in a high pressure situation. And taking a look at the terrain that is surrounding these canyons, it's just as unique as everywhere else. You have these beautiful rolling hillsides with tons of cracks and angles that you can peek from, and some of them stretch across multiple grids. You can see the canyon off in the distance to the left, and it really feels like it's transitioning from the canyon into a forest, while also maintaining the defendable and offensive PvP tactics that you can utilize around these new terrain features. There's going to be so much more opportunity to ambush people, less of a chance that you're going to see somebody from 800 meters away. There's going to be more surprise interactions that are going to catch you off guard, and it's going to keep everybody, even experienced players, on their A game. Especially once you incorporate foliage and trees on top of everything. Look how dense this forest is, and we're only one grid away from the canyon. These new canyons are going to be one of the most unique features in all of Rust because previously the only thing comparable to this was the giant mountain that spawned on the larger sized maps, but we're on a regular 4200 sized map here. And unfortunately, these large mountains are nowhere to be found and still only occur on the larger sized maps. I'm on a 6,000 size here. I'm pretty sure they only spawn on 5K or larger. And I must say, even if we don't see these on smaller than 5K sized maps, they still look spectacular, and there's plenty of 6K sized maps out there on the large servers. The main difference that I've seen between the 4200 and the 6,000 size map besides this mountain is that there's more space to build, but everything still feels relatively similar. And all of the clips that I've shown you so far in this video are a combination between the two maps. And to be honest, I don't think I can really tell the difference between the two of them until you get really high up in the air and you can see how close things are. But when you're down on the ground, the time that it takes to travel between things is long enough that it doesn't feel weird between the two different sizes. But I will say the 6,000 size map is much better than the 4,200 size map. For cinematics at least. And then we've got the Desert Oasis, which looks so good during the sunset and sunrise, and also brings multiple fresh water sources into the desert, and helps provide a bit of coverage in the otherwise barren landscape with a bit of foliage. It's pretty much a version of the swamp, but in the desert, so there's not much to talk about it because it's pretty small, but there are 3 variations of them that are able to spawn. And then there's a bunch of small tweaks occurring to the atmosphere, the contrast, the brightness, the coloring, the saturation. I don't think a lot of that has been merged to the Aux2 branch yet during the recording of this video, so I can't really see much of a difference yet. But one thing I will say is the weather in Rust makes or breaks the immersion. Coming from the north, I love the way that the snow and the Arctic and all of that type of vibe in Rust is. It's so good. And now it looks even better with these new cliff formations that are scattered all over the place. But the only new changes besides the cliffs that we've seen in the snow biome is the little islands that are on the edge of it, which are also applied everywhere else. So what I'm assuming is happening is things like the military tunnels are going to get shifted over into the snow biome more often than normal to make room for all of these new environmental monuments that spawn, which also kind of gives more purpose to the snow biome because most of the time there's not much going on in the snow besides the Arctic Research Base and farming nodes. Personally, I'd like to see more variation in the types of weather that occur and more frequent at that. By reducing the brightness, the sky darkens. By increasing the fog, it thickens, and then by increasing the contrast, it pushes the fog back. And it gives this really moody vibe to the game that looks really nice, although when you use these settings, the nighttime is ridiculously dark. Overall, this is about to be the biggest change to Rust since the recoil, and I've spent around 50 hours all in all on the Ox 2 staging branch and editing the past 2 videos, and from my experience as somebody with 10,000 hours playing this game and probably 20 to 30,000 hours editing videos and learning about it, I would say this is crazy. It's so good. There's so many small details and things that you can tell they took from the community's input and implemented in a very nice way. And I personally don't have many criticisms, and I'm sure there's so much more things that are about to come that have been in development for who knows how long, because something like this takes a massive amount of brain power and effort. But that's all I got for you guys today. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Leave a what's that noise? What is that?
Join the Crucible grounds today, the ultimate test of your survival and skills in Rust.